As always, nothing you hear on the Stripped Pod should be a substitute for personalised professional medical advice. Please always consult your clinician or other medical professional before making any changes to your diet, dosages, or healthcare plan.
Hello and welcome to the Strip Pod, your weekly diabetes fix, where we strip back the stigma for real, honest conversations about diabetes beyond the numbers.
I'm Ash, a passionate diabetes advocate and founder of Strip Supply.
And I'm Braden, co-host without a working pancreas.
Coming up on today's pod is a double dose of diabetes gold. We're hearing from Diabetes Diarist Elia's wild diagnosis story. Spoiler, she diagnosed herself mid-lecture at uni. And we're also chatting to Ali from Australian Diabetes Technology, swapping tips on disordered eating and new diabetes tech designed to make life with type 1 just that little bit easier. But Braden, first, what's been the high and the low of your week?
Can I just start? We got a double dose. We got an Elia and an Ali. Is that like Dream Team or what?
We do. It is the dream team. Honestly,
That's
when you
insane.
listen to them, they are a dream team.
Elia and Ali. How good.
And
Good stuff.
in International Women's Day week, we've got two female powerhouses. It's a great
Beautiful.
episode. I didn't even plan that, but I'm glad we're
No.
here.
Yeah, I just saw that and I was like, hang on, that's amazing.
Yeah. So we've got Elia, Ali, and Ash. Are you feeling left out?
Yeah, a little bit actually. Do we talk about AI as well? Is that another
That was-
AI, Elia, Ali?
That was last week.
True. Yeah, okay. I mean, AI is everywhere. We'll talk about AI at some point today, no doubt.
It is everywhere. Yeah.
What's happening? Well, look,
You're a bit
couple of
wet,
things.
aren't you?
Not yet. It's actually sunny outside, believe it or not. Like, you wouldn't know there's impending doom coming for Brisbane. But yes, we are very much in preparation mode for Cyclone Alfred, which is crazy to talk about. Brisbane hasn't seen a cyclone since 1974, and it's like, we've been through floods, all that sort of stuff, but a cyclone's a whole nother beast, and it's just something that it's like, okay, prepare now, but it's like, what do we actually got to do? What's
Yeah.
going to happen? And it's
What
just
are
the
you
unknown.
preparing? Mhm.
And because it's like impending, it's like, it's coming. It's going to happen.
Mm.
But what's going to happen? Do you know what I mean?
We're not sure.
Because we haven't been through it. So it's a bit of a strange one. So we're recording Tuesday afternoon. It's set to start bucketing from tomorrow and sort of make a landfall Thursday or Friday. So just now sitting back and waiting, really, and preparing as much as we can. And it's just so bizarre to be talking about a cyclone. I mean, like, I just can't wrap my head around it, but it's here and it's something that we got to do. So it actually sort of led me to start thinking about, what about diabetes? And I think it's important that we actually talk about this today and just having a contingency plan, an emergency plan for everyone who's listening. And, it's not something that you really think about until you have to think about it.
Mhm.
And if you're like me, like, I've never thought about an emergency plan because I've never had to. So
And weren't we just
up until now.
this is so kismet. We're just talking about this last week when we
Yeah.
watched that video from Diabetic about the LA fires and
Yeah.
having an emergency kit. So
Yeah.
have you put one together?
Well, no, I haven't put one together as such, but I think it's just preparing
Mm.
and making sure that I'm ready for any situation that happens. We might be, let's say we're a week without power. What am I going to do? So it's just being prepared. And obviously I've got portable batteries. I still got my mini fridge that I took traveling, so I can put insulin in that. I can keep that cold. I'm fortunate. I've got a fridge and a battery in the back of my ute,
Mhm.
so I can run that if I need to keep insulin cold. Just preparing, because we're probably going to lose power at some point. So
Mm.
preparing to make sure that my insulin doesn't go, hot and cold and hot and cold. And also stocking up on lollies, like hypo treatments. Because the shops, what it was like during COVID up here and the
wild.
floods. And it was just absolutely bonkers. You can get anything. So just making sure I've got enough lollies or enough hypo treatments to get me through for the next potentially week.
Mhm.
And, I've got enough supplies, obviously, to get me through the next week, definitely. And just making sure I've got a plan for my insulin and making sure that, if power goes out, what's my backup plan? So I've got, plan B and C. But I think it's really important for everyone to just think about that, if something was to happen. And because it's, it's Australia, most of our listeners are in Australia. So
Mm.
we go through these things a lot. And it's not until you're actually in, a disaster zone that you've had to stop and think about, well, what happens? I think that's just an important takeaway for people today.
Yes. And Brayden, I'm going to have to ask, have you got AA batteries on hand?
I have so many AA batteries now.
Oh, great. Okay. That's okay. I can rest easy now this week knowing that you're all stocked up.
I have AA batteries everywhere. So AA batteries and no dramas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, obviously, I'm just a very nonchalant person. It's not something I've ever thought about until you have to think about it. So I think it's just, if you're like me, maybe just stop and have a think about what would you do in the situation. Do you have enough supplies to get you through a week? If your power goes out, what are you going to do? So interesting times up here in Brisbane, that's for sure. Everyone's a little bit on edge. You can sort of tell everyone's talking about it. Everyone's sort of reading everything that's happening, and everyone's just a little bit nervous, just waiting to see what happens. So we'll see what happens, but look, hopefully everyone in Brisbane's all right.
Yes, we're thinking everyone else in Australia, I will speak on behalf of them. We're thinking about you guys in Brisbane and in Southeast Queensland. And yeah, make sure you've got something to power your pump. You've got the ability to change over your CGMs. You've got some supplies in stock at home, just in case you do need to go a week without being able to go to the pharmacy. And making sure you've got those hypo treatments, and people in your house know what to do if something happens with your diabetes over the next week.
Absolutely, yeah. Very important to stop and think. But yeah, enough doom and gloom. I think, we're sick of talking about it up here. It's going to happen. We're just sitting waiting. So what's happening? Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in somewhere different this week.
You're not in Sydney.
I'm not in Sydney. I'm coming to you from Adelaide. So I'm in a podcast studio that I have never been in before. And I ran in here 1 minute before we started recording. I don't have my usual glam lighting that I usually have, but I am in Adelaide. Oh my goodness, my word. I'm in Adelaide this week for a startup conference. It's a 3-day conference. It's called South Start, and it's hosted in Adelaide today and then in wineries over the next 2 days. So it's a bit of a tough week, but these conferences, they're always a great way to learn what's new in industry, what's new in tech. This week, we're talking about a lot of AI at the conference, and it's inspiring and it's energizing to be able to head back into
AI.
Exactly.
I was coming.
I thought you read ahead in the brief.
I did.
So yeah, it's exciting to be able to head into business next week with some energy and some new ideas of how we could be doing things better.
Amazing, yeah. Winery a part of the conference, or is that just your 2 days tacked on?
No, I wish. It is part of the conference. Very exciting. I've never been to an Adelaide or a South Australian winery, and definitely never been to a conference hosted at a winery. So they're putting us all on buses tomorrow and busing us out to the winery.
That's dangerous.
It is. And we're out there for 12 hours tomorrow and the day after. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Unreal.
That's definitely my high.
Can't wait to hear about that next week. That's for sure.
Absolutely. But the low of the week, it is a high. Like Dexcom G7 launched last week out on the NDSS. Yep. So exciting. This is just the next step in some awesome diabetes tech that makes life simpler. But there has been a bit of a disconnect between the product coming on the NDSS and product actually being available for pharmacies to order. So that's been a bit of a headache. No pharmacy in Australia currently has the Dexcom G7. I have not seen it yet. So I'm just trying to communicate with our members as much as possible about there may be some short delays, particularly if you were super excited and ordered the G7 on March 1st. I tried to tell people, with all of our marketing, there are delays. You're not going to be able to get it this week, but hopefully delays should be minor. If there are extended delays, we do express post those parcels. So it still gets to people in the same amount of time.
Lovely.
Yeah. But I went on such a rant last week. Brayden, do you watch MAFS?
Look. Shock to everyone, probably. No, I don't.
I actually think you would really enjoy it. It's
I love reality show. It's my favorite thing ever.
Are you being sarcastic?
Absolutely.
I was about to be like, oh my goodness, something we can bond over. Because I do genuinely like reality television. Yeah. And I do tell myself as I'm watching reality television, I promise you, Ashley, you're a smart person. You just love dumb stuff. But for me, it's a great way. Yeah, good. For me, it's a great way just to be able to disconnect after a long, heavy day of work, which is why I feel like maybe you'd like it. And some of the things that happen on reality television are just wild.
It's quite humorous, yeah.
Yes. For those of you who don't follow us on Instagram or TikTok, and by us I mean Strip Supply, I went on a bit of a rant and I thought we would play a little bit of it in today's podcast, and you and I can chat about it
Righto.
because it caused quite a stir.
One story told on Mass last night, and we need to talk about it. I'm gonna bring you over here to the good lighting. So what I love about reality TV is that comments and conversations and behaviors that usually happen in private happen in public, which means that you and I can talk about it, and as a society and a community, we can reflect on it and think about how potentially we could be doing better. So just in case you don't watch as much Maths as I do, this week is Confessions Week for new couples, and that means that the couples are encouraged to write letters for each other, sharing something deeply personal about them. So these letters usually end up being stories about a person's past or something that's happened to them previously that's really stuck with them and has shaped who they are as a person today. So Elliot, the groom, wrote in his letter a story about his sister being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when they were kids. I think Elliot said he was 9 or 10 years old when this happened. And you and I know how traumatic a diabetes diagnosis is. Imagine being 9 years old and dealing with your younger baby sister being diagnosed with diabetes. In his letter, Elliot uses words like he felt hopeless, like his world was ending. It sounded like it was a very traumatic diagnosis, and it was probably a cornerstone memory from his childhood, which is why he was bringing it up in this letter. He actually called it his most painful memory, which brings us to the problematic part. So his wife in the experiment, Veronica, didn't understand how this story that he was telling her from her childhood was at all meaningful, and she didn't understand how the emotion of feeling helpless matched the story about this other person being sick. So the act of Elliot telling this story about his sister's diabetes diagnosis prompted a confrontation and an argument because Veronica said that she just didn't feel like Elliot had shared anything of significance. I believe she referred to it as he shared nothing. But why was this such an interesting conversation to be having on national television? To me, this was such a pivotal moment of showing a very clear depiction of how the public view diabetes. The public perception of diabetes is so warped, and diabetes is so misunderstood. We just have the completely wrong idea about it. It was so interesting seeing almost exactly what I think a lot of people with diabetes deal with is people who haven't had a personal experience with diabetes, kind of brushing their feelings under the rug and not validating that how they're feeling is acceptable simply because people think that diabetes is somebody's fault and completely preventable, and these are just things that are absolutely not true.
As you can see, it was a topic I was very passionate about.
Rightly so. What a rant, might I just add.
Yeah, it was a
Unbelievable.
rant. The extended version is actually on TikTok if anyone wants to listen to it in full, where I actually read out quite a few tweets from X, I suppose it's called now. But Brayden, I'm interested to hear what you think. You know, how does hearing that someone sharing a really personal story, they were 8 years old, I got it wrong in the video, Elliot was 8, telling a woman who has clearly not had a personal experience with diabetes, telling her how traumatic this experience is, and her essentially saying that it was nothing. Tell me what your thoughts on this.
Just brushing it off, yeah. I think personally, if this happened to me, I'd be so furious. I mean, like if I was telling someone, you know, that I'd just started dating or, you know, in this case was married to,
Yeah.
you know, about my diagnosis and how traumatic it is. And if they sort of played it down like, oh, it's not a big deal. I mean, like that would piss me off. That would really piss me off. So look, I think, yeah, the perception of diabetes is still so misconceived within the community. And it is so traumatic. It is. And for his sister to be in a coma diagnosis, you know, it's a huge deal. And yeah, it would piss me off. It really would. I don't really know how to put that in a political term.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. It is like at the end of the day, there are just no words for, I think. And then, you know, this storyline has been carried out over the next couple of episodes, and everybody else's responses to Elliot's story, all the other brides and grooms got it. They understood. And then they have this panel of what's called experts, which are 3 psychologists essentially, who sit the couples down and they go through kind of a public therapy session every week. And even the experts were like, I think that we need to revise how maybe you're responding to this situation, Veronica.
Yeah. I mean, diabetes aside, if you're telling your significant other about something that really impacted your life and affected you in a way, you hope they wouldn't be reacting like that. So it's an interesting conversation, yeah.
Exactly. And I think your response was really echoed in our Instagram DMs because we did have a huge response from this rant and from other people who also listened to the episode. I'll just read out a couple of DMs we got. I am going to leave everybody anonymous because it is a bit of a heated topic.
Yep.
One person said she was callous in her response. Even if I had no idea about the trauma, I'd still think she was classless, graceless, and callous. Someone else said, we're all educators and advocates for ourselves, our significant others, and most importantly, educators. I see so many stories of type 1 folk getting angry at misconceptions and misunderstanding. I always try to see these as moments to educate, which is a fair point. I think that
Absolutely,
maybe Veronica just needed to understand type 1 a bit better, obviously. It's a shame that she didn't then go away and Google it herself because it is so hard for the people living with type 1 or, being a poor person for type 1 to always be holding this burden.
Yeah.
Someone else said, and just a real quick trigger warning, we're about to talk about something that's a little bit dark, so maybe skip forward 20 seconds if you don't want to hear that. But someone else brought up the news story that's been happening in the news this week. They said, while that the one time type 1 diabetes comes up, it's surrounded by a negative environment, and right around the time the Queensland media was publicising the sentencing of the group in Toowoomba who were involved in the death of an 8-year-old girl with diabetes because they refused her treatment. So it all played out in a really awful time. It was all kind of happened all at the same time. And the last DM I want to read out, after watching your story about maths, it triggered a memory for me. A few months ago at work, I chose not to eat something my colleague was offering me as my BGL was 10 and I didn't want to deal with the dose or the effects of eating it. This colleague's husband had insulin-dependent diabetes. To the best of my knowledge, he was not insulin-dependent, and it has escalated over time to be insulin-dependent. He's also had a lower limb amputation because of his diabetes. When I said no thanks, that I couldn't be bothered with the repercussions, she said that her husband doesn't have all the drama that I do, that he only takes insulin twice a day and wouldn't stress like me if his BGL was over 10. So if some people with diabetes and their partners don't grasp it, how can we expect the general population to? Harsh, but fact.
Yeah. I don't really have much I can say to that.
Yeah. I think ultimately, and this was the point I think I was trying to make in my rant, I'm not sure if it actually came across, no matter what, even if it's not diabetes, I think as a community and as a society, we just seem to be lacking a bit of empathy and kindness lately.
Yeah.
Even in the way that Veronica responded, you can just say, hey, I don't get it. I don't really understand why this is such a big deal for you. Can you please explain it to me? Like, I want to understand, just coming at it with kindness. So that's just the message I wanted to send out. But yeah, super interesting, as it always is to see diabetes on the TV.
Just be nice to each other, people.
Just be kind to one another.
Just be empathetic, be kind, be nice. It's not hard.
It's not
Try
hard.
to understand other people and their stories.
Absolutely, isn't it?
Everyone's got a past. Moving on.
Let's dive into today's episode with this Diabetes Diary entry from Elia.
Hi guys, my name's Elia. I am a registered paramedic and I live in a beautiful town called Toowoomba, which is about an hour and a half's drive from Brisbane.
Tell us about your diagnosis journey and your current management style.
So my diagnosis journey is probably a little bit different to, I guess, the traditional type 1 diabetics diagnosis journey. I was 27 at the time and I was studying my degree at uni. So I was studying to be a paramedic. I started noticing some changes in my body. I didn't really think too much of it. I thought really it was just stress. So a little bit of weight loss. I had a few infections that weren't healing, but I also wasn't sleeping a lot and I also wasn't probably nourishing my body the way I should have been. So I just put it down to that. Anyway, I was in a lecture learning about DKA and all the signs and symptoms, and I was staring up at this glaringly obvious set of signs and symptoms and just ticking them all off in my head one by one. Obviously, that still wasn't enough for my little brain to compute. I was in a little bit of denial, I think. So I went about my life. I think my symptoms probably manifested and worsened over a period of 6 months. And it wasn't until the very end when I went on a student placement with an ambulance service that I got to prick my finger with a glucometer. Came back saying that my blood sugars were, I think, 23 at the time. And I panicked, but not enough to take myself off to a doctor. I just told myself no. I then returned home and went back to work. And at the time, I was working at a boarding school that had registered nurses on site. And I got the nurse to check for me, and they were just coming back as high. So, yeah, I took myself off to our local ED. I presented. I said, hey, I think I'm in DKA. And in true form, the triage nurse thought that I'd spend a little bit of too much time on Dr. Google, which is fair, I guess. But yeah, in the end, turns out type 1 diabetic, late onset. And truly, it was quite helpful being a student paramedic at the time. It made the transition into having diabetes almost easier, I think, because I understood what was going on in my body. My current management style is I use a Dexcom G6 and I have a T-Slim pump. I initially started my career using pens because that's all I'd used since diagnosis, but last year transitioned into a pump. And honestly, I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. It has changed my life. It has made work a lot easier. It's made life a lot easier.
Do you have any diabetes hacks or diabetes habits that you're especially proud of?
Honestly, I don't really have any hacks. I suppose for me, I have a bit of a different lifestyle when it comes to shift work. And especially in an ambulance service, we don't often get our regular break times. And more importantly, we don't often get to have our breaks, sitting at a table or somewhere where I can sit down and have a decent meal. So what I always do is I just make sure that whatever it is that I have for my meals that day is something that I can have on the go, but it's something that's going to both fill me up and also keep my sugars stable. I always keep a lot of little treats as well. I can just quickly grab if I'm on my way into a job or on my way out of a job, just in case I start to feel like I'm having a low. I keep multiple packets of the glucose jelly bears because I'm not a jelly bean fan, but I found the jelly bears are great. They're a yellow packet at the chemist. If you haven't had them yet, strongly recommend them. They are delicious.
What's been your biggest diabetes whoopsie moment?
My biggest whoopsie probably came in the last year. I had the gastric sleeve surgery about a year ago. I found that post my type 1 diabetes diagnosis, I gained a considerable amount of weight. And of course, managing diabetes, insulin, food, now with a tiny tummy was a bit of a head spin. So I starting back again on eating normal foods. And for the first 6 weeks after my surgery, didn't use any insulin at all. I had some long-acting insulin periodically, but not every day because I was having a lot of lows in the first 6 weeks because you don't really eat anything. But it was when I first started eating again and I'd gone away to Cairns with my partner and I was eating a meal that thought I'd be able to eat a lot more of than I actually could. I gave myself a bolus. I was still using the pens at the time. And I gave myself a bolus of my Fiasp. And of course, I completely misjudged how much I could eat, which again, being that I was probably only 8 weeks post-op was not a lot. So I had probably one of biggest hypos I've ever had. My sugars went down to where they were actually just reading low on my CGM. And so, yeah, that was a couple hours of just trying to manage my blood sugars, eat as much as I can, get them back up, only for them to drop back down again. It was a lot, but thank goodness I have a really, really beautiful partner who was right onto it. He was going down to the corner store to buy more juice. When it ran out of jelly beans, we took ourselves off to somewhere to grab some more. So, yeah, that was probably my biggest whoopsie
What's something you wish you knew when you were diagnosed?
in the initial stages. And I guess for the rest of your life, the money that goes into being a diabetic. So the money that you personally will spend. And I remember back, especially when I first was diagnosed, I was a student. I was working 3 jobs that was barely able to pay my rent, groceries, and enough to sort of have at the end for whatever I needed for my diabetes supplies. So I did have to move back in with my parents. Bless their souls. They were quite happy for me to do that. And even to this day now, obviously I'm in a much better position financially, but I do still feel the strain and I get frustrated sometimes because I look at other people around me. I'm like, you have no idea. I think another thing that I wish I knew, I thought all endocrinologists were, going to give me the same information, be the same kind of support. I would just have the same advice across the board. I quickly learned that wasn't the case. My first endocrinologist, while I'm sure he was very good at his job, probably wasn't the right endocrinologist. And I didn't know how to advocate for myself at the time. I didn't know how to advocate for the issues that I was having that he was seemingly glazing over, especially when it came to my excessive weight gain and all that sort of stuff. So I switched to an endocrinologist when I moved to Toowoomba, who was probably just the most amazing person I've ever met in my life. And I feel like I've achieved so much more with my diabetes with her than I did in the 3 or 4 years that I was with my previous ones. And I think the other biggest thing is you will absolutely be allowed to enjoy cake and cocktails. They are my vice. I love a slice of chocolate cake and I love cocktails. And of course, we all know both those things equal sugar plus, plus, plus. But, there's no reason for you to not be able to enjoy these things. So enjoy the cake, enjoy the cocktails. That is my biggest piece of what I wish I knew before I spiraled and I thought, I'm never going to be able to enjoy a margarita again.
What do you think is the hardest part about living with diabetes, or what's an area of diabetes that you find you struggle with the most?
I think the hardest part for me when I was first diagnosed with diabetes was, again, because it was so much later in life, especially friends and family who were really close to me. They'd always known me as a certain person. And then I got this diagnosis, which to me, it changed my life directly, like for me personally, but I didn't think that it would change the way my family and friends saw me. I felt myself being handled like glass sometimes, which just really irritated me. I found it really hard to explain that nothing has changed for anybody else. Nobody has to do anything differently or treat me differently. I'm still the same person. I just come with a few extra bibs and bobs and just considerations, but they're for me to manage. Of course, I wanting the support from the people around me. So yeah, that was probably the hardest part, was just breaking down the way my friends and family saw me post my initial diagnosis and having to remind them that I'm the person I was prior to. Just, you know, you don't have to handle me with care. I'm totally fine.
And on the flip side, what's something that diabetes has brought you in your life? What's one thing you've learned from having diabetes?
So I feel like it's given me a really unique perspective and a unique set of skills in the career that I'm in, which is not probably something that most people can say. It's allowed me to be a really good advocate for the diabetes community. It's allowed me to be able to have insight and empathy that others may not hold as deeply, just because I'm in the community and I understand the condition. I have been able to connect with my patients and provide insight based on lived experience as well.
And what's one piece of advice, a thought, or an insight you would tell someone who's been newly diagnosed with diabetes?
You just need to listen to your body, advocate for yourself, and live your life. Just live your life. Anything you did prior to diabetes, you don't have to give those things up. Keep going to the gym. Keep going out with friends. Keep eating what it is that you want to eat. Don't limit yourself. Don't stress yourself into disordered eating. Don't stress yourself into being recluse and not doing anything because you're worried that something's going to happen. Okay, you can live a very, very normal life. Go for the job that you want to go for. I was diagnosed partway through my degree, and I spent the last half of my degree deciding whether or not I need to give up on my dream of becoming a paramedic, because I just didn't think, or I didn't know, I didn't have enough education to know if being a paramedic and a diabetic was even feasible. Never give up. Even if someone puts a roadblock towards you, ignore it. You can absolutely do it. You can do anything that anybody else can do. You just do it with a little sidekick of insulin and a few extra beeping noises. So absolutely, just live your life.
You can absolutely do it. You can do anything anybody else can do, just with a little sidekick of insulin.
Just
love
keep
that.
living your life. Keep living your life.
Isn't that your
And
mantra?
That's exactly right. And, you're still the same person, just a few extra bits and bobs. Love that.
A few extra tubes, you know?
But I couldn't agree more. Like, diabetes shouldn't stop you from doing anything, from achieving what it is that you want to achieve. So obviously you just got to take a few extra precautions and be a little bit more careful and, be prepared for these sorts of things. But you can drink all the margaritas and eat the chocolate cake and become a paramedic. I mean, it is what it is. It just becomes a part of you, really.
Yeah. And I feel like that is a great segue into the next segment because there were so many topics that Elia touched on that were really important. But one that really stood out to us and we agreed was really relatable was her initial mindset around fun foods when she was diagnosed. And I am saying fun foods in inverted quotes. So we jumped on the phone with Ali, a credentialed diabetes educator from Australian Diabetes Technology, about her take on diabetes and having a healthy relationship with food and insulin. Hey, Ali, thanks for joining us on the Strip Pod.
Thanks, Ash, for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited.
So Ali is a credentialed diabetes educator with Australian Diabetes Technology, and we've asked Ali to join us today to talk about a topic that we see come up so often in our DMs and also in our Diabetes Diary episodes, and that is this mindset around eating fun foods and demonizing foods based on how much insulin we have to give. And Ali, I'm wondering, do you hear this topic come up very much in your consults with patients about people feeling like they can't eat fun foods?
Oh, absolutely. It's a daily struggle, right? I guess when you're initially diagnosed with type 1, you're taught to count carbohydrates, you're taught to base your insulin ratios off those things. Everything becomes a number, your blood glucose level. So I think that it's a real numbers game for these people getting diagnosed with type 1 and thinking about everything that goes in your mouth all the time. It's a real, it has a real impact on the way we see foods. I think that, people's relationship with food changes and it's not so much, I'm going to enjoy this, slice of chocolate cake. It becomes, oh no, what's this slice of chocolate cake going to do to my glucose levels? And I think that can have a real impact. And we're seeing a lot of people come in with disordered eating, and that's starting from a really young age. And I do believe that sometimes the way that clinicians, the way that even parents talk to their children around food can really impact that long term. Like children from a young age are being shown when they're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, oh, if you eat that type of food, like that high carb food or that pizza, that's going to have a real bad impact on your glucose levels. So I think, from a young age, we're noticing these things and these disordered eating patterns.
And we should have also mentioned that you're also living with type 1 yourself. So you are coming at this with a wealth of personal experience. Do you mind me asking, how old were you when you were diagnosed? How long have you had diabetes for?
I'm really old now, but I got diagnosed when I was 9.
Yeah.
So it's been over 25 years. Is that telling too much? I don't know.
Been around the block.
I've been around the block, and I myself have had moments of disordered eating. We were just talking about it before, but around 40% of people diagnosed with type 1 diabetes will have some form of disordered eating. You've got things like bulimia, where we're seeing that a lot with the teenage girls or teenagers in general withholding insulin to lose weight. That's been around for years and years, like forever, I would say. But now it's, with CGMs, obviously CGMs are amazing and I love the technology, but it is also bringing around a bit of anxiety because we're seeing numbers that we wouldn't have seen, 5-10 years ago. But I think what we really need to do is focus more on treating a number. When I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I remember the stigma around type 1. It's still there. It hasn't gone away. And to be honest, it probably hasn't gotten any better. But I remember always feeling judged about my numbers. I remember going to clinic and, the doctors would be like, oh, why did your glucose level go high there? And then I think that leads into starting to not really be honest about your diabetes because you don't want to disappoint people. You want to be known that you're looking after yourself. But I think what I've shifted as a CDE, I've shifted my mindset in terms of I don't judge your number. I just want you to know that whatever your number is, we can treat it, whether it's high or low or in range, like it doesn't matter. I think if you can kind of come at it from that mindset, like you just treat a number with insulin. At the end of the day, that's what diabetes is, and making it more around that and not judging is really important.
And that's a really interesting topic, actually, is we have all of this access to amazing technology with CGMs and insulin pumps being more accessible. But sometimes having more information isn't always better if we aren't seeing those numbers just as numbers. If we're feeling like they are more personal and it's a reflection of you, and if it's a success or a fail with diabetes, when that's not really a helpful mindset to have, is it? Like you've just said, those numbers are more just indications and they're not a personal reflection. And I like what we said around this idea of high carb foods. Sometimes some clinicians will talk about high carb foods as being bad foods and bad for your diabetes. And we don't really believe that talking that way is very helpful. What do you think around that conversation of these bad foods? Should it more be a conversation around, okay, we like to eat pizza, we like to eat chocolate. How do we manage our levels around these foods instead of steering clear of them?
Oh, absolutely. We should really watch our language around food, and we shouldn't be calling it good food, bad food. We should just be calling it food. Food is to be enjoyed, and food is a social event that we can enjoy with friends and family. And for someone with type 1 diabetes, we should never feel like we need to miss out on those things. Obviously, there might be times where you have to be a little bit more planned or have a bit of a forward think about what type of food you might want to eat and think about the protein and the fat and adjust insulin based on that. But I think overall, someone with type 1 diabetes, there isn't such thing as a diabetes diet. That's in the past. Even though people still think there is, I think, we should be treating food as food, and food is to be enjoyed. That's my mantra.
Absolutely. I love that. I feel like I want to write that on the wall in my kitchen or something. Food is to be enjoyed. And I agree. Let's leave diets in the past. I don't know if they've done anyone any good.
Yeah, absolutely.
To finish up, do you have any tips around if someone is maybe listening to this conversation and thinking, oh, that's how I kind of think about food. I'm not sure if my mindset around food is as healthy as it could be. Do you have any tips around not demonizing foods as being good or bad or avoiding fun foods?
I just think it's really important that if you're enjoying something, you need to find a way to make it fit for you. So if you're withholding foods or if you're not enjoying food, then you definitely need to talk to someone about that. So whether that be one of your clinicians that you see at the hospital or in a clinic, a dietitian, psychologist, there's so many people out there that really want to help. And I think that's really important, even if it's starting off slow. Like, don't, go gung-ho eating all the foods in the whole wide world. Start slow if it's something that you're worried about. Maybe just start slow at home rather than going out to eat foods. And I think also that's a really interesting question about being initially diagnosed with diabetes. We want people not to have to think about not eating food from diagnosis. It should be something that's taught at diagnosis, that there's no such thing as a diabetes diet. We eat food like any other person. We want to have a healthy diet. We have sometimes foods, we have all the time foods, but nothing should be forbidden. If you're dealing with foods that make you feel a bit worried or a bit unsure, there's so many new technologies and things like that out there that can really help. So, you've got your high protein, slowly absorbed meal functions on some pumps. You've got these hybrid closed loop systems that are helping with those high fat, high protein meals that we often see a spike 2 hours post eating those foods. It's also really handy to take note. So what impacted me this time? Like when I ate this food, what happened? So just take like a mental note. Some people that I see also just keep an actual note in their phone. So then they can keep going back to that and know that, what they're doing is working, or kind of tweak things as they need. I think people like on multiple daily injections that are eating tricky food, I always tell people to underdo it at the start, because the last thing you want to do, especially if you're out and about with friends and you're eating these foods that you don't normally eat, is have a hypo. So if you underdo it, you can always give yourself a top-up dose 2 hours later if you're worried about a high glucose level. It's one of those things that you just have to see what happens and learn from previous times, I guess.
Yeah, no, that is such a great tip, because knowledge is power. And if you can be taking notes on, okay, I ate this at this time and it had this effect on my blood sugar levels, over time, you're going to start to notice these patterns. And then all of a sudden, if you want to eat this food, you know exactly how your body is most likely to be affected. And you feel like you have this power to know exactly how to manage your levels with that food. And so exciting to hear about these new updates with tech that are just going to make it so much easier to be managing any kind of food. Eating out at a restaurant, who knows what's in this meal? Don't worry, my closed loop system can deal with it.
Tech is so exciting. It actually gets me really excited. I have had multiple people this week, just random people. Like there was someone at the gym the other day, and they're like, oh, my brother has type 1 diabetes and he does nothing for his diabetes. I'm like, I want to meet him. I want to make his life easier. Like there is so many things that are out there that can try and help people live an easier life with type 1 diabetes. So it's just what's coming is really exciting.
Yeah, totally. Because it can seem really daunting to change diabetes management styles and to learn something new, but maybe the long-term game could outweigh that short-term discomfort.
Absolutely. I think knowledge is power, and I think people don't make technologies and don't improve things to make things harder. It's just going to be better in the long term and better for everyone with type 1. So I'm really excited.
%, I agree with everything that you've just said. And ultimately, it is about finding a diabetes team that really wants to help you, right? Like finding people that you really connect with, finding clinicians that you really connect with. And of course, we do love the whole team at Australian Diabetes Technology, and you are all available for telehealth consults all around Australia. I think you're opening up your consults in a couple months' time. So we will leave a little link in the show notes in case anyone is looking for a superstar diabetes educator and wants to get in touch.
Thanks so much, Ash.
So, Brayden, have you ever experienced this? Have you ever had a negative relationship with food because of your diabetes?
It's a very interesting question, and I've never really thought about it too much, but I think I wouldn't say my relationship with food is negative. I think it's changed. I think it's probably changed for the better. I think I have a really healthy relationship with food now, and it's because of diabetes. So I would say it's sort of a negative into a positive. Obviously I look for the lower sugar content foods, and I'm also a lot more aware of what's in food because of diabetes. So I would say, like Elia, have never sort of stopped, or changed too much of my life because of diabetes. But I would say I'm much more aware of food. And I think, as I mentioned, I have a lot more of a more positive relationship with food than I did probably prior to diabetes. But I can completely understand the negative effects of diabetes and the relationship with food. I mean, it's very overwhelming, and so it could be easy to just say, I'm not eating. Like, if I don't eat, I don't need insulin. I don't have to stab myself with a pen. So it's a very delicate relationship, very delicate balance.
Very delicate balance. I couldn't agree more. It's completely understandable, the exhaustion about diabetes, but food is meant to be enjoyed. And just like Ali said in her segment, you can have the sometimes foods, you can have the all the times foods, you can have any kind of food that you want. Just like how Elia said, you can do whatever you want. There is just a little bit more thinking that goes into it.
Yeah, you just have to be aware. and aware of what's in the food or what you're doing, and that comes with time too. So just becoming attuned, I suppose, with your diabetes and with your body, and as you do that, you become more comfortable to be able to experience food and high carb foods and high sugar foods and anything that you want, really. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, that's all we've got time for in today's episode. As always, the Stripped Pod is brought to you by Strip Supply, Australia's first diabetes subscription box.
We'll be back in your ears next.
Sorry, I tried to shorten it.
Yeah, I was like, hang on, isn't there more to that?
Yeah, no, fine, I'll say it. If you never want to run out of your diabetes supplies ever again, head to www.strip.supply to order your first box.
We'll be back in your ears next week. Until then, tell diabetes and cyclones to get pricked.
We're here. Strip Supply acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.